in Judaism is the custom of reading Kinot on Tisha B'Av. In fact, interestingly, there's a very interesting historical fact about the Kinot that are read on Tisha B'Av, and that is that in the early centuries, in the 3rd century or so, Jews were banished from being in Jerusalem, and there are ancient accounts of Jews sneaking in on Tisha B'Av to say Kinot, to say lamentations at the Western Wall. That's partially why it's called the Wailing Wall, because there was a custom of going to the Western Wall, going to the Kotel, going to Jerusalem, and reading lamentations. So it's customary for the entirety of the morning until Chatzot, until midday, which for most people on the East Coast, it's about 1:30. To say Kinot, to say the lamentation, and many of these lamentations were written by the same person. There's not much we know about this person. There's various ideas of who he was and where exactly he lived, but his name was Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, and he is sort of the poet of Tisha B'Av. He wrote many of the Kinot that we read, and he lived around the end of the period of the time of the Talmud under the Byzantine Empire. And he wrote these Kinot, these lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av, mourning the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. So the first Kinot, you can find it easily online. I know that Koren put out this year a free PDF of the beautiful Koren Rabbi Sachs Tisha B'Av Kinot. So you can find the actual text online on Sefaria, Koren, whoever it may be, or you can just listen. The first Kina is the Kina of Shavat Suru Mimeni, also written by Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir, and it's the first Kina that's said after Tisha B'Av. Shavat Suru Mimeni speaks about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. It goes in a semi-alphabetical order, and I'm going to read each stanza and explain. So the first Kina we're going to read is Shavat Suru Mimeni. Shavat Suru Mimeni Shimuni Ovrai Sechil Mos Simuni Bedrei Chaverai Sakos HaMishkan Miskos Devirai Sakos Avil Vegu Giborai Sakum Madu Avirai Kesila Kol Avirai. So we say we're mourning that God has left us. The Sukkah of God, the Beit HaMikdash, which was a place for the Shekhinah, a place of rest for divinity and holiness, is destroyed. The next one is also very, very heartbreaking, speaking about the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Naflo deinu betzul dechuya, inichik telech hazon ben brechya ad pile gilgol chavuya, eini meoleles vivonis nechuya, osavanicham vaikro libchia venam aleilani bochia. One of the terms that stands out in this Kina is Eini meoleles vivonis nechuya. I am crying in broken Greek, referring to the Romans. The Romans were a succession of the Greek Empire, of Alexander the Great's empire, and so my eye is crying in broken Greek, referring to the Romans, who are sort of a continuation of the Greeks. Now we're referring back to the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, and also very, very heartbreaking. Al pnei prasnu petzu chasideo, pal gesuf zochra ke'aru yesodeo, pacham chechilo tochaf sodeo, potzu chazire yare yechasideo, potzu maser yolenideo perso, tziyon beyodeo. Here we're mixing both the destruction of the first temple and destruction of the second temple. Al pnei prasnu petzu chasideo, referring to the Euphrates River, where when the Babylonians expelled the Jews, many of them were brutalized on the banks of the Euphrates River. Al pnei prasnu petzu chasideo, palge suf zachra ke'aru yesodeo. It remembered, while it was being destroyed on the riverbanks of the Prat, Zion, Klal Yisrael was remembering Palgei Suf. It was remembering the banks of Yam Suf, where in huge contrast, things were so much better, and that was the time we were being taken out of Egypt. Pachad chet Shiloh tachaf sodea, the destruction of Shiloh that's described in the book of Shmuel, that the Jews were sort of taken over by the Philistines in the time of Eli. They were afraid, they remembered that, and they were terrified that the same thing is going to happen. And of course, as we know, not only did it happen, but so much worse happened. The Shiloh, the Aron was taken, part of it was destroyed. Here, they were both completely destroyed and taken into exile. Patzu chazire yar ayeh chasideh. The wild boars of the forest said, "Where are its righteous ones?" And this is referring to Edom, to the Romans, which are often referred to as boars. Ayeh chasideh, they said, "Where are its righteous ones?" Of course, we know that they had the 10 martyrs killed, and they said, Ayeh chasideh. Zion spread out its hands in begging for mercy from God. So the notalet olorer medonai tzak amidi mebendinai tzadiku Adonai. Here it's referring to a contrast also with the Haftarah. The Haftarah we read on the last day of Pesach is Od Hayom Benov La'amod. One day the Mashiach is going to come and stand in Nov. And who stands in Nov instead in northern Israel? Who stands in Nov instead of the Mashiach? The Romans coming in to destroy. So it's a contrast between the destruction and what should have been the Mashiach and the good things. Yet nonetheless, in the days of Yoshio, which we'll hear about more soon, the Jewish people said, Tzadiku Hashem. They said, righteous is God, Hashem is righteous. Karasi leyoshve gibono deim zirmuni koli lashmiya barabi grimuni kumiyavori belselemuni karasi lemavai morimuni. So atak kali mechbadeta. It says in the Torah that God is going to bring on you a nation from afar that you don't even recognize their language. Atak kali mechbadeta. So you, what you did is, and we're speaking to Hashem, you made the light ones, the ones who were able to run quickly, heavy, meaning Bnei Israel were not able to escape them, and nonetheless they have taken my crown off of me. Karasi leyoshve gibon od heim zirmuni. This is referring to one of the saddest stories about the destruction. It says that when the Jews were being led out of Jerusalem, the neighbors, the Bedouins, the Arabs, the people that were there, the Givonim, the people who came to convert in the days of Yehoshua, came to them and offered them food. They said, "Look, we see your predicament, we see your situation. Let's give you something to eat." And what did they do? And the Jews were starving, so what did they give them? They took out and they gave them salty meat, and they gave them what would appear like a jar of water, but it was empty. It was filled with hot air, and people died just from that sort of treat, quote unquote. So Karasi liyoshve Givon odem zirmuni, the people of Givon who originally came to join us when we came into Israel, they gave me a hard time and they cheated me. Karasi leme'ahavai marimuni. All the nations that used to be our friends cheated us and did not help us. Now we're speaking about the King Yoshio. Again, we're going to see more about King Yoshio. His story is described in the 4th chapter of Eicha. Eicha yuam zav yishna kesem atov. And one of the things we mourn is the loss of good leadership. And that's what we say here. Lama ruach hafeinu latevach shamaru, ra'isa ki chesanu roram kamaru, ra'isa ki amal v'chas ve'ivuyach damaru, rafta be'al Yechezkel, linekom kamomaru, Ravenak chidemi goyamaru, re Adonai kitzar li, me'ai chamar maru. Why did our righteous one be destroyed? Their skin got dried, they were in the heat, and they were, as they're being expelled, we're talking not only about the destruction, not about the expulsion, but also the expulsion where people are walking out in starvation and thirst almost reminds you of the death marches, where people towards the very end of the Holocaust died not from the outright killing in the concentration camps, but it's just the long marches without any food, without any water, without consideration for the temperature. That itself was also part of the destruction. And the next part is starting with hope. We're asking Hashem to return us. Hashivenu, Sisi Shema Lego, Eitzayoni Shivtomer Mos Chatzerai Ladkeni, Sifsei Meshorei Virdomu Mulad, Vieni Shomat, Uzmoros Afechi, Netateni, Shambu Benadu Chatzat Abrieni, Shamu Kinan Choni, Kitam Chakto, Becheso Panecho, Toshiv Boem Gemuk Yoz Chazos Panecho, Tirdof Letzamoni Yoatzei Atzfunecho, Tifein Lavev Noset Seipeninecho, Tikro Leshakram Komus Befinecho, Tavo Kol Rosam Lefonecho, Tavo El Tor Asher Kilanu, Limevo Chamos Bechemoni Alonu, Ad Lechalach Bechavori Glanu, Zokinu Bachur Vesubach Kolanu, Rama Betno Amcho Kulanu, Zechor Adonai Mehoi Olanu. So we say here we're referencing not the destruction of Jerusalem, but rather the expulsion of the 10 tribes. We say the 10 tribes that were expelled decades before Judah, before Bnei Israel were from Yerushalayim. The 10 tribes were expelled to Chalach and Chavor by King Sancheriv, and so we're saying return them all. Re'ei Hashem, we're Amcha Kulan, we're all your people. The next Kina, Zayin, Eicha Atzta, starts with the word Eicha, which is so famous from the book of Eicha, Lamentations, and it's a question, but it's a rhetorical question. We say Eicha, and we say, how did God do this? And then we reflect on all the promises that were made to the Jewish people. So it's a sort of disbelief and lamentation. How's it that with these promises, this is what we ended up with? And we recount everything that Hashem had originally promised us and what we ended up with, what we had towards what we had when what we had towards the end. So Eicha Atzta, it's the 7th Kinot. Eicha Atzta ve'apecha liyad bi'ad adomi memunecha ve'lo zocharta bris bein habesorim asher berarta lidpunecha uvechen bitinu zechor Adonai mehoi olanu. How did you rush to have your faithful ones destroyed by the Edomim, by the Edomites, by the Romans, and you did not remember with a bet, also brit bein habesarim, you didn't remember God's covenant with Abraham. Eicha garta begarosecha liglos miad geim geulecha velo zacharta beligas dilu b'derech asher dolagto ligdolecha uvechein dibarnu zechor Adonai mehoi olanu. How did you scold the ones that you redeemed from Egypt and have them expelled in the hands of the proud ones, the Romans? How did you How is it that you thought to expel us in the hands of the Hololim, people who are haughty and they party without any consideration? Speaking of the Romans, and how did you do that without remembering everything that we've done to congregate in the Beit HaMikdash? Every one of these stanzas has 3 parts. We say, Eicha, how did you have us endure this? And then at the same time, we describe the destruction, and then we ask Hashem, Zechor Mehayalanu, remember what we have been through. So we say, Eicha Zanachta V'Zamecha, how did you lead us? How did you let go of us? And let us have your own Beit HaMikdash destroyed in the hands of strangers, and you did not remember Chitun Chukei Chorev, the laws of Chorev, the laws that we made, that we accepted in Chorev, how did you not remember that? And so we say, Zechor Hashem Mahayolanu. Eicha torachto betorchecha litrof v'yatorfim telohecha v'lo zocharto yikar yedidus yosher asher yichato liyodecha v'chen yolanu zechor Adonai me'ayolanu. How did you allow your sheep to be devoured by the predators? How did you allow your sheep, being Klal Yisrael, how did you let Am Yisrael be devoured by the predators, and the predators here being the Romans? How did you allow such a thing to happen? And again, the Kinot concludes with the Zechor Hashem Mahayalanu, remember what we have been through. ולא זכרת לו לזנוח לעולם אשר לימדת לי לקוחך לו ובכן לעגנו זכור אדוני מעולנו. How is it that you directed in your anger to allow lions to consume and to take over the Jewish people, and you didn't remember the promise that you made in your Torah? You said that you'll never forget us, you said you'll never abandon us, and so how did you not forget that? And so we say, Zechor Hashem Mahayolanu, remember what we've been through. Eichel milalta b'moasecho, limchos biadmo, nimenasecho, v'lo zocharto nesias notzas nesher asher nosasa linsuecho, uvecheino hinu zechor Adonai Mahayolanu. How did you allow those who despise you, the Romans, how did you allow them to take those who praise you and destroy them, and you didn't remember Nisias Notas Nesher, the carrying with the feather of an eagle? When's that? What's that referring to? That's talking about, of course, when Bnei Israel leave Egypt. It says, Va'esa eschem al kanfei nesharim, I will carry you on the wings of eagles. So how did you allow those who despise you expel and destroy those who you took out on a eagle's wings? Eicha sachto v'sarecho l'sager b'yad se'afim sadecho v'lo zocharto zadi yadoim asher itarto la'avodecho u'becheino abinu zechor Adonai me'oyolamonu. How did you allow your witnesses? Bnei Israel are known, Atem Edai, Bnei Israel are Hashem's witnesses. How did you allow that and not remember the crown that you gave us in Har Sinai? It says that every Jew had a crown for Nasav and Nishma. How did you allow that to happen and not remember what happened at Har Sinai? ובכן צועקנו זכור אדוני מעולנו. How did you allow the Bnei Israel to be destroyed, to be cracked, and not remember Tzvila Tzaddik, not remember the Tzaddikim, Moshe Rabbeinu, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? And so we cry, Zechor Hashem Mahayolanu, remember what we've been through. Eicha karasa v'kriyasecha, liknos b'yad kamim keruecha, ולא זכרת רגש רכב ריבוסיים אשר הוציאו לרעך ובכן רוגענו זכור אדוני מעולנו. How did you call out in your voice to others to come and conquer us, and you didn't remember the chariots, you didn't remember the angels that we had at the time of Har Sinai? Eicha shafta v'shafecho l'shalus v'yad shodedim shleimecho v'lo zocharto tokef tal tali soar asher tikanto lismimecho u'bechein to'anu zchor Adonai me'oyolanu. How did you seek to destroy us in the hands of robbers, of thieves, and you didn't remember the beauty of the curls that you established, meaning talking about everything that you've done for the Jewish people? And I want to read the next and last stanza, line by line, because it's really one of the most heartbreaking parts of the Kinot, and it also speaks about what we're doing. It's sort of a metacognition. We're speaking about what we're doing, It's the last stanza in the Kinot, and it really speaks about what we're doing. We gathered in order to pour tears like water. Because on this day we were captive. We were taken captive twice. I remember sitting in peace and tranquility in Jerusalem. I complain, and now I'll cry until the sky. I'll cry to the heavens. The next Keynote we're going to do is sort of a dialogue, Keynote, also written by Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir, Keynote. You can find it on Sefaria or in the available online free Koran Tisha B'Av How did they cast off my crown? And it's a conversation between God and Bnei Israel, and God responds in the Kinot of Bnei Israel. So Hashem tells Bnei Israel, how is it that they cast off my glory and brought into my temple a idol? And this is referring to several stories in the book of Melachim, where the wicked kings of Israel would bring in Avodah Zarah into the Beis HaMikdash. They would bring in Avodah Zarah into the Beis HaMikdash. So Hashem tells us back, you're crying now, but don't you remember the time you brought in to the Beis HaMikdash Avodah Zarah? That is what brought about this destruction. This is something that came from your own hands. Funny They, meaning the Jewish people, distorted justice. They didn't keep all the mitzvot, and so instead they got dust rather than rain. I originally promised them that they will have so much food that by the time they finish the winnowing and the processing of the wheat, then they'll already be planting the next cycle of wheat. And now, rather, what do they have? They have famine and destruction because they didn't keep what they were supposed to keep. I promised that there will be peace in the land, but instead there was war because they didn't keep what is written in the Chukosai. Your rock, your source of faith, is the one who ended up turning on you because you didn't keep the mitzvahs, and he ended up sending you out into exile. Hashem took the corner of justice, the Beis HaMikdash, and destroyed it. Why? Because he found in it every form of impurity. Remember, the wicked kings of Israel would bring in Avodah Zarah to the Beis HaMikdash. I see that's something that would that was the reason that he destroyed it. Zonachel Yom Kiryas Moadechem Vehevil Sharechi Lamid Asraglechem Mibikesh Los Potzvig Lechem Vegomarti Omer Ufonis Yalechem. So the superior, meaning God, took the place where you would celebrate your holidays, Kiryas Moadechem, the Beis Hamikdash, where you would assemble on Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and instead put you into exile. חשב צנוע מלוכת קשושון ומחלב עולולהו סדישון כי תארכו פסו הלא כקישון ושאלו הידע גם תמור ואכלתם יושון נושון. So instead of being able to eat everything and have plentiful supplies of grains, instead you ended up with famine. תבו נכסי רוב די דוכני בגי חמוס כנכתל מחני הרי כמה שנים גילה יסוד מכוני וסומי תוכי אומר ונסעתי משכני. Instead of my promise of giving my place of dwelling in your midst, instead that very place of dwelling was destroyed with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. יושבו מבקים מנעת, נסייכם בארבע מיסוס, הקל נסייכם חרב ורוב וחיו ודבר שיחסכם. כסר צילום פוצבי סלחתי בסוככם. קולו לשוד בקרגע, הלכם ובוכם, נשמעו מהול עליכם, לחיקכם נשפכו נפשו סול עליכם, במועזכם שיח, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. At the end of Shema, will you say, Ani Hashem Elokeichem? But because you guys rejected Ani Hashem Elokeichem, your tents, your homes were destroyed, and Jerusalem was sent into exile. And then the next thing it refers to is one of the saddest parts of the book of Eicha. It's when the children turn to their mothers and they say, can we have some food? And the mothers didn't have food because there was famine, there was siege on Jerusalem. So instead of being able to respond to them with food, they had famine because they did not listen to the Imlos Ishmael, the part in the Tochecha and the Chukosai, where Hashem says, if you don't listen, destruction will come. Next part refers to one of the sadder parts of the destruction, and that is the false prophets. Before the destruction of the first temple, and also the second temple, there were lots and lots of false prophets, people who would go around and say, don't worry, you guys are doing fine, everything's going to be okay, you're doing the right thing, you'll be just fine. And people were therefore confident. People were okay with violating the words of Hashem because the false prophets assured them that everything is going to be okay. Nevi'ayich to tarmis shov chazos v'edrosh lisfach upatzti elezos pitisi muchenegdi yeshivu azos ונפתי וסחתי אף אני אסזו סוף כוחר כושור כומוני מבפנים ומבחוץ עצמי סמוני כי בני זדים חילדו צפוני לרוב ולא לטובנו ונוסעתי פה בוני פוצו זדים לפני מי תחלם כבדו במפוקת ואילה לא שחקו במופס בפלא עונף ונוסו ונום באימא דאילה Also vayorem kol bnei shon vedomi shikrani begei tzimon vechol shona v'shona hosip yogon alon meiskoas v'nom v'shovarti esgelon. You can imagine when the Romans are coming, the tremendous sound of the metal. They had metal shields, metal helmets. They had these huge chariots, and that was something that came with a storm. And so we say instead of having peace and instead of having quiet, we have this rumble of war where the Romans stormed the land of Israel. And that's why it refers to them as Bnei Sha'on, the children of noise, meaning the Romans came in with this huge roar of war.
וכילו כוחי בנאום ושם לו ריק קומי דפקי שבי על דומי וסניחו מארץ כל לכבודו מראש השכני בדמני וחושך הילוך בנאום There's a famous story about Napoleon, and Napoleon was traveling. He conquered tremendous amounts of Europe, and he was going from town to town. And the story has it that one night he passes in a small town, and he goes next to this building where people seem to be assembled, and it's quiet in there, and people are crying. And he comes in and he sees people sitting on the floor like we're doing now, and it's dark and the lights are dim. And he sees that people are so sad, and he says, "Why are they crying?" And they say to him, "They're Jewish and they're crying because their temple was destroyed." And he said, "That's terrible. When did this happen?" They said to him, "It happened 1,700 years ago." He said, "And they're still crying today." And he told them, if they're still crying today for a temple that was destroyed way back then, and this people is going to be around also way, way ahead from now. And that's what we're saying here. We're saying, Kumi dofki shavi al dami. Don't stop crying. Don't stop asking Hashem to rebuild. Kumi dofki shavi al dami. Usnike me'eretz kolech v'domi mirosh ishkani v'igni v'choshach yiluchi b'neum. Leim telchu imi re'egor ali v'so. Sam l'roim la'yas v'likas midbaro yisi d'muyas. Go kid Nuyas Suragin Nuyas Visham Vishlachti Bochem Eschayos Shochbu Bein Lufkisom Nichmarvin Dolam Lim Garvin Marpeole Are Kame Shonim Malomani Leiskale Anushim Bevikuach in Bele Tikra Edo Laleto Aladmo Nile Sacha Fole Shas Fole Shivasan Koni Tom Tarai Betes Kola Nermona Kenem Amti Berivo Lachti Afani Afani lochud v'yoker shikar arva simcha v'shvitzkaron lor teisha v'egeh v'sharon eicha yosh bo chavatzeles hasharon. This brings us to one of the most famous kinos. Again, you can look them up if you want to see the actual text on Sefaria and Korin's Friagada online. This is Kina Yud, and it refers to Klal Yisrael as chavatzeles hasharon, the rows of the Sharon, of the Sharon is the area where you have today Israel's coastal area. The rose, the most beautiful flower there, referring to Am Yisrael, was sitting in silence. How is it possible that Chavatzelas Hasharon, this beautiful flower, is sitting silent? So we're in Kina Yud, also written by Rabbi Elazar HaKalir. Eicha Yashva Chavatzelas Hasharon. Eicha Yashva Chavatzelas Hasharon, V'dom Amron mipi nosei Aron, V'no mimishmerosam Kohanim b'nei Aharon, Kenimsar Abayis v'mesarvei Maron, Bocho Sivke Mechumeshes Sporim, Kenera Kohen V'novi V'yom HaKippurim, V'adamo Nishchatu Prochim Kitzvirim, V'nodu Ketziporim, Kohanei Tziporim. Shall cry, the one who has 5 books, meaning Klal Yisrael, who has the Torah that has 5 books, as a prophet and a priest are killed in the Beis HaMikdash. And it's talking about, of course, the Zechariah, the Navi, who was killed inside the Beis HaMikdash when Bnei Israel didn't want to listen to him. They said, "How dare you say that we're going to be destroyed?" And they killed him inside the Beis HaMikdash. And it says because of that sin inside the Beis HaMikdash later, so many Kohanim were killed when eventually when it was destroyed. Goso me'arto kalo mekushoto bavon masros ushmito uve'ar baras shekotim hushpeto me'edio upsheto mishmeres mifshobo boto darchei heichal shomimu kenifratz koslo ve'hameil kenikra pesilo uradosh palmitilo ve'nomishesilo kohen ayesolo Oyu oivim mal ivim belo chami lechem kevitlu alo poros laro oiv lechem vehu ravu vehu tzmo mimayim umilechem kevutlu shtei alechem mibeis lechem. There's 4 or 5 references just to the word lechem, bread. So the enemies attacked those who brought the bread in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim who brought lechem upon him. And why? Because bitlu halo paros laroiv lechem. Because Bnei Israel didn't keep the commandments to give from your bread to the poor. Because we didn't keep that mitzvah, therefore they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash where the lechem upon him was brought. Then they were put to thirst and starvation Kivutlu shtei alechem mibeis lechem, and the mitzvah of shtei alechem, the 2 loaves of bread that are brought to the Beis Hamikdash from wheat on Shavuos, wheat that is picked near Yerushalayim in a place called Beit Lechem, that was also canceled out. Vayetzer on bakesef nechefas usimuro efer al rosho chipas v'neiros nichbu menorah nichpas kefosh ubelechem ufas nilkedayo defas. Actually, the city of Yodfas is most known for one of the people who lived there, and that is Josephus. Yosef ben Matityahu was one of the first cities in the north. It was when you came into Israel from the north, from where the Romans came. It was one of the first cities to be captured, and it was destroyed terribly. And then Josephus joined the Romans, and it says Benilke the Yodfas. Yodfas was taken away, and eventually the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Zochrozman asher nasa v'nishma heishivu v'ata anos amein lo avu lanu v'rosh subu v'rogu v'huktu v'ulavu kohanei ha'elo v'avu chet chadon v'omro le'elil ze'el v'hiligo v'sita v'chozel עבור כן וקנו במרגיז זייל ויצא ממעונל כפר עוזיאל תומסו הכניף פה תבל ונעלו רבה חובל ונאבק רגלו כאובל ואין מסקרבל וכהני ארבל. We mentioned 2 specific areas that are destroyed. Kfar Uziel, also I believe in the north, and Kohanei Arbel. Arbel is one of the steepest, if not the steepest cliff in Israel. It's right west of the Kinot, of the Sea of Galilee, and you have a Mishnah that says Nitai Ha'arbeli, and it's also something that was destroyed by the Romans with tremendous cruelty. You can go visit there. They have the site where you see the Jews lived in these caves that were inside the cliffs, and the Romans lowered these kind of elevators, sort of boxes they would take and fill them with Roman soldiers and tie them with chains and lower them down, and it's harrowing. When you go visit the site in Israel, they have a replica described in Josephus, and you see that the Romans, even though these were Jews who probably must have not been so many, they were living in these caves on a cliff. The Romans went and destroyed even that. That's Kohanei Arbel, the Kohanim who were in Arbel. So serious was the destruction. The Yodo Paras Tsar Bevesis Bul, the wicked one, destroyed Beis Bul, the Beis Hamikdash. Kikloyo Chuyamti Kedor Hamam. I have been punished and been worthy of destruction, like the generation of the Mabul, the great flood with Noah. And again, it mentions a specific one, and that is Mishmeres Elkanah. So the family of Elkanah, the Kohanim, were also put into exile. Lo l'moromayin tzofas v'chesef al cheres chipas ubechizuk musar orpas v'neras v'nilpas kohen tzfas v'moron mishniya nilei siteon v'hikani v'yivaron ubeshigon ufokad olay avon novegi ve'on v'nomimon mishmeres v'skohen ma'on. So Hashem told me, he struck me with blindness and brought to me the sin of Nob and Givon, where we didn't respect the Mishkan properly. Niskadol avon v'nicham k'ushavti anuna migliyam v'nimnati v'letzaftet v'minim v'ugov v'nosolai mishmeres yeshevav. The music was stopped and disrupted as the Mishmeres, as the group, the family of Yeshevav, the Kohen, a family of Kohanim, was discontinued from their service in the Beis HaMikdash. Sila birai morei horaya velo nizkar li'akedas moria umerov mered umeria utagaer umeria mishmeres ma'adya. my sin were so serious and it wasn't remembered for me. The Akedas Moriah, when Isaac was brought on Har Moriah, and Mishmeres Ma'adia, the family of Kohanim, also was stopped. Al gabi chorshu chorshim meirichu ma'anis ve'riku olai cherev echanis ve'yudesi tzomos ve'sanis u'mitzuras tochnis yotzoy bobo bonis Persavein yod sholeach kidol emina ve'ashkem ve'shololach ve'ushves overis melach men shemen memulach ve'rosh mamlach. Instead of the building of the Beis HaMikdash, instead of the glory that should have been there, what we have is Yavanis, we have the Greek that the Romans brought with them, and then it says Persa ve'yad sholech. It says Persa in Eichel. We say Persa Tzion ve'yadeh. Tzion raises its hands. You know, when someone asks for help, they raise their hands. And it says Persa Tzion ve'yadeh ufores eima. There was no one to give it a hand on the other side. Persa Tzion ve'ein sholech. No one sent their hand from the other side. Why? Ki lo he'emina behashkim b'shaloach. It did not believe in the mitzvah of shiluach havalim, of letting slaves free. Tzadiku Adonai kipi umoras ve'oru ala yisod bo huaras usmor ozi ve'zimras kinim olam echas u'bekatzei eretz nizras nizras. And now the frustration that when I call out to Hashem, there's no answer. Karasi l'tzuri v'koli lo'ara v'konanti v'yar be'ara v'chavonir adulek b'marav v'reicholo ramacholo. I called to my master, but he didn't respond. And the candle of the menorah, the western candle of the menorah, was always lit, but even that went dark. Yosarti konio besanio veonio ukeholi katon lapevach menuyo veno mechanuyo migdal. This is referring to a pasuk in Yeshaya, Ani asora rolo nuchama. The Bnei Israel are a poor person who is refusing to be comforted. And look at me, look what happened. My children have gone into desecration, into exile, into massacre. Shamu ki nizamti b'tzachana v'nisra fadas merom shibuya L'ushati l'shamo ve'arbu b'yom ester chavuya noda be'ez chobiya Shamu ki nizamti b'tzachana v'sos amneni techina v'lo nosan l'rachmi v'chanino Umi kiryas chano no kfar yuchano. We're speaking again about a location that was destroyed by the Romans. Kfar Yuchana, even while we were being destroyed, all these different places were completely uprooted. And now we conclude with a prayer. Two things. First of all, don't judge my adversaries with more kindness than me. If I got all this for what I've done, surely they deserve also to be punished. And then we say, Tavo v'samriach v'choshki tazriach. Come and light up my darkness. The kadesha atzmosenu takriach. Now this is one of the most fascinating terms. If you take a look after the western wall towards the south, you'll see a place called Wilson's Arch. You can look it up. There's a place called Wilson's Arch. It's at the southwest corner of the Har HaBayit. So if you have the western wall is here, then it continues towards Wilson's Arch, and then comes the end and it turns to the other wall. Wilson's Arch is a place that a British archaeologist in the 1800s discovered is not just a rock coming out of the wall, it's rather what used to be an arch that would take people from the city of Jerusalem to Har HaBayit to the Beis HaMikdash. Archaeologists look very closely under the arch, and one of the rocks there, they find an inscription that is about 1,700 years low, 700 years old. And they date it to the time when Jews were not allowed to come to Jerusalem. It was completely forbidden during the Byzantines for Jews to come into Jerusalem. And it's an inscription in Hebrew. and it's from the book of Yeshaya, Isaiah, and it says, "Ve'atzmotechem kadesha tifrachna." Your bones are, rather than being dry and broken, are going to flourish just like the grass flourishes. It's a prophecy and promise of Hashem that resonates so much that the Kalir put it in here, and we ask, you should again, Kadesha atzmoseinu tafriach, you should make us thrive again like the grass, like this prophecy that inspired someone to come in the dark of the night into Jerusalem, to climb up, I don't even know how they climbed up, and to put those words, that's Mosechem Kadesha Tifrachnu. You'll smell the smell of our karbonos and accept them. And you should bring us and rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. The next Kinot is one of the most famous Kinot. It is called Kinot Yud Aleph. You can see it on the art scroll. You can see it in the Sefaria, and you can see it in the pre-Koran downloadable PDF. Agada Kinot Yud Aleph by Yekonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshio. This has tremendous historical import. During the times of the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, and actually already from the middle, you had kings that were so wicked that they completely obliterated any observance of Torah. They put Avodah Zarah inside the temple, inside Jerusalem. They turned the temple that is made for Hashem into a temple of Avodah Zarah. And there were some really wicked kings. They eradicated Sifrei Torah. They really turned Jerusalem into the city of sin that it became and brought its destruction. And in this darkness, there was a king named Menashe, the most wicked imaginable, and Ammon. And they had a son who became a king at the age of 8. And he was the last righteous king of Israel. His name was Yoshio. King Yoshio grew up, he was brought up by Yirmiyahu's father or grandfather, one of the Kohanim, and he, from a young age, had a passion for Torah, had a passion for mitzvahs, had a passion for Hashem. And when he became king, he decided he's going to clean up shop. And he destroyed the Avodah Zarah that was in the Beis HaMikdash. He destroyed the Avodah Zarah that was in Yerushalayim. He went from house to house to make sure there was no more Avodah Zarah. And he was certain that Bnei Israel have returned to their previous splendor and glory of righteousness. And it says that he didn't realize that he was being tricked. Why? People had doors with Avodah Zarah that when you would close it, there would be the shape of an idol. It was the shape of an idol, half on this door, and they would put it together and it would become an idol. And when Yoshio's agents would come and look for Avodah Zarah, they would open the door and they would see nothing. And that we're going to see in the Keynote called Avon Leitzanei Hador, the clowns, the people who were cynics. That didn't help. That made the Jewish people sinful, even though he wasn't able to see it. And one day, Yoshio gets a request from the king of Egypt. And the king of Egypt tells him, listen, I have nothing against you. However, I have something against Babylon. Now, I want to go to war with Babylon. I have nothing against you. I just ask you for a simple favor. Let me pass through your country. I'll go through your country in order to get from Egypt to where today is Syria, Iraq. You need to go through Israel. He says, please do me a favor. I just want to bring my entire army through your country. I'm not going to do anything to you. Yoshio says, look, it says in the Torah that if the generation is righteous, then not cherev lo tavor be'artzechem. A sword will not pass through your land. And so he says, cherev lo tavor be'artzechem. I'm sorry, but you will not go through my land, he tells Paro. And he goes to war with Paro, even though the prophet Yirmiyahu tells him not to do it. He goes to war. And there's a famous battle in Megiddo, and Yoshio, the last righteous king of Israel, the one that turned course, the one that gave us hope that maybe perhaps Bnei Israel can do teshuvah and be restored, he was killed by Paro. And it says, Vayoru Amorinas Yoshio, they shot their arrows in him. The Egyptians' cavalry shot their arrows into him, and it says that he was filled. He was punched holes like a sifter. Is filled with holes. His body was filled with arrows, and it says that Yirmiyahu is there for the battle, and he goes to his body as he's dying to the king Yoshio, and he hears his last words, and his last words are, "Tzadiku Hashem kipiu marisi." Hashem is righteous because I have broken his word. I didn't listen to what he had to say. Tzadiku Hashem kipiu marisi. And so the fourth parak of Eicha is dedicated to Yoshio. It's Eicha Yuam Zav Yishne HaKeser HaTov. How will gold be dimmed? And that is this kina also written by the Hakalier. It's called Vayekonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshio. Yirmiyahu wrote a special kina of Yoshio. The reason we say an entire kina, an entire chapter in Eicha for this righteous King Yoshio is because King Yoshio was the last hope of the Jewish people. He was the last righteous king. He came after a string of vicious kings and Menashe, Ammon, people who eradicated Judaism from Jerusalem, and he restored it. And once he was dead, there was not much hope. Vayekonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshio. Vayekonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshio. Eicha Eli konenu me'elav ben shmone shana heichel lidrosh me'elohav. When he was 8 years old, he started seeking out his God. Bnei Cham be'Avram chanu alav v'lo huzkar lo sigoy nifalav gam bechol malchei Yisrael asher kamu ligdor lo kam kamo mimos Avigdor. There was no one like him from the days of Moshe, Avigdor. Dovak bochetz leitzanei Hador asher kamu achar adeles lizdor. He was caught up by the sin of Leitzanei Hador, the clowns of the generation. And he was caught then by the children of Cham, by Egypt, the children of Cham. Yochlim zera shichor kismatov picham umishchor vayigdal avon meishivyo minachor v'od lo sholach yodom minachor zachu amor Kinot das leokim b'tzayim raso be'oru rasha leokim choshach ta'oro keniyatzurecho kim bebet amoa seidas v'chubukim Tovim roim nikru b'shoch malach maliv aloch hayom lesaleach yedei amoretz domim b'malach teyanesh b'vitz yes b'nei filoch kilo amonai leches aram naharaim v'mano samar cherem koshu b'Efraim v'lo shomar achozeh v'shuv achoraim kivzera nigzero esachsik mitzrayim Meichados, Sisiras Mizuzos, Chados Hamsosi, Chedu Lebazos. No one omim lechum olehavzos, v'lo yitzipon v'sov duazos. Soru eidu adlo, sheyo v'yamanu suru mot yesod neshiya. Pnei krov kekorib v'dalo, solo retio. Vayoru hamorim lamelech Yoshio. Udenu otzem einov begev yono chatzim chetz achar chetz morim lelo chatzim tzoduhu v'samuhu kamator olachitzim vayizreku bo shlosh meos chitzim kalim hitu acharav ezomo tzofiu Ne'admitui nefesh maso veifiu ruach sepaso v'hifto mipiu tzadiku Adonai ki morisi fiu sisi nofki ki nezam l'shalem sheyonom ve'avon bitzom tam kesem atov amzu b'fo she'om vayekonen olov Kolei chayuam tam b'mikra echad kos negid ol ishtos b'moed shnas hashmita Kinot kegol lehakel leyesos tolo v'esrim u'shtayim me'aros shosos kisachtu lo echa v'esrim u'shtayim osios kinos lubot mechol es kishorach mechol lizam osi ki le'ad yahili Roshati venosati venutasholi. The next Kina Yud Bet, is one of the most heartbreaking kinos, and it's speaking about Oholi, the 10th, my 10th. And it's speaking about the partnership, the home built together by Hashem and Bnei Israel in the 10th. And it's speaking about how Hashem left the Beit HaMikdash earlier than it was destroyed because he can no longer be there. And so it's a lamentation for the Beis HaMikdash from two ends. Bnei Israel say, how can you leave your beautiful home that I built for you? And Hashem says, how can I stay in a place that was so impure and you didn't keep up the commandments that I told you to keep in order to have it? Oholi. Oholi means my tent. Oholi asher to'av lo bereishis im kisei chovod letzarfo lama lanetzach shudad biyad shodedim ונהיה עיסו כרועה באותיו, ורעשת ורגמת ואתו מעליפו. אוהלי אשר קוממת לשונאי ארץ, בחרדס ניאיפו, למה לנצח תומץ ביד צורים. ונהיה עיסו כציפור בודד על גוג מור צורח נבידידיפו. Holy asher patzto lemano letzir v'atamod imodipo lama lo netzach urar biad arevim v'beniyeh sokitzone v'tzovor ve'aye ibo imoshavpo. So Bnei Israel tell Hashem, how you told me to build this. How can you leave? You told Moshe to build it. How can you leave? And Hashem responds, Oholi asher nochiso be'anenei od lizos asher yeshno po ve'inenu po lama lanetzach moas v'yad mordi v'niyeso kegivar lo yochal le'oshia malecho v'vovo po milecho po Oholi asher kivamto mu machon l'shivtecho v'chofef lechupo lama lanetzach yu'o v'yad yehirim ונהיה כתס בחולו בינו נובי ונמתו עין פה. Why was it given to arrogant ones? Why was the Beis HaMikdash given to those people who destroy it with arrogance? Oli asher chaniso me'oz v'sov mipo lama lanetach zunach mi'ad zorim ונהיה כתוסת יוצר חוצה ולא עבר פה. Holy asher chamtu ashlich bo l'chonach l'gor al polam l'netzach ducho mi'adom b'niyeh so k'gerort v'namto k'lo nosav adbo Holy asher v'avon bitzi chosh v'koch ve'im nishpo l'mo l'netzach u'ko v'yadom mos v'niyeh so koreach v'molon v'od milecho. Why is my tent that was built with purity, why wasn't it given to the nations? And Hashem is ke'orech b'malam, like a stranger in a hotel. It no longer was a home for Hashem. Ochor v'kenu mipo l'chol dor v'dor nodar kitzpo v'chupo al nemi kol m'shoso v'ikapo zos balil kifitcho kuk v'chapo refuosi betucho kirega be'apo be'adato Eicha yoiv be'apo. Next kina is a kina written, kina Yud Gimel, written about Akedas Yitzchak. It's about the contrast between what should have been following the Akedas Yitzchak and what happened later. Eiko. So we say, how did such a thing happen in a place where you had Avram bringing Yitzchak? This is Kina Yud Gimel. Eiko Omar Kores Log Bepetzach Bibris Ben Abesorim Ko Yela Netzach Venato Bulu Atzamai Beretzach Lom Elohim Zonachto Lo Netzach. You promised Avram Avinu that it's going to be forever, that you're going to care for his grandchildren. Why did it seem that instead of forever caring for his grandchildren, you've abandoned us forever? Lama Elohim Zonachta Lanetzach. Why did you abandon us seemingly forever. Eiko gashke selo lo leratzo secho nelcho ad ko pitu bedo secho leadato dochru bekefel achrayo secho yesham apcho betzon marisecho. He went like a sheep to slaughter on Hara Moriah, and now his children are being slaughtered in the Beis HaMikdash. Eiko avtochas hakunim nekudim bemesuos im ko yomar ko yuchashos ve'inato v'yikach tadim meleged yeshuos. Harimo pel mechol masios eiko zom ve'orag mitri v'gam no ba'kodesh v'yifen ko b'chol chutam ba'alas kodesh ve'inato chel kamocha chodesh kolei rav oyev ba'kodesh. How did you not remember everything that Moshe has done for you? Eiko tov kishulach yo lavodecha kosomar leshalacham lovdecha ve'inato yoshuvu vogdi bebeis v'yodecha shavu torecha v'kerem moadecha. Eiko krisus chadashos berisos b'chol margechatos lailo b'mokseyosos ve'inato luachu v'naleim liesos. Samosos, Eiko mishmo Moshe loko samarlim asbayis mula, and Atanas obneamlo yivolakim maybe the malo. Moshe went up to the Moshe went up to the Har Sinai, and he called us Kotomar Beis Yaakov. The Bnei Israel were considered a household, and now this household is being violated. Eiko siach shishim osios akidu, moskos ebarchol shishim giborim domos ve'inato, oskorindomos b'sachit v'kardamos. 60 letters in the blessing of Yevarechecha Hashem Yishmerecha, all destroyed with axes made out of wood. Eiko patzlako b'amu be'rach, am kedoshecha b'shuv v'chos le'daber umar le'idoshecha ve'inato tzaru al yerkochecha, shilchu b'aish migdoshecha. Instead of blessing the Jewish people in this place, they were expelled with fire. Eiko kichas l'dim shlemecha kosase lo notarim lo v'yisolam ve'inato rashu v'yirishu shamecha lo retzchilo lo mishkan shmecha eiko shivas shofros eretz kosashes sheshes yom imapel chom l'oretz minato tovush ve'inato shalom tovu l'oretz sarfu kumale el l'oretz. Ego Teshuah, Sasami Otzor, Bechol Samar Shalachos, Imnatzar, Ve'inatutu Puprochai Bechatzar, Ad Mosai Elohim Yecharef Tzor. Instead of all these blessings, we had the Kohanim, the young Kohanim, killed inside the Beis HaMikdash. The next Kinot, we're going to skip to Kinot Tet Zayin. Kinot Tet Zayin and Yud Zayin are both very, very, very riveting. And the Kinot Tet Zayin speaks about what Titus did once he came into the Beis HaMikdash, and how the Romans, when they went in, completely violated and desecrated the Beis HaMikdash. So the next Kinot is Kinot 15, is Zchor Asher Asa Tsar Bifnim. Remember what the wicked one, what the enemy did when he was inside, how he violated and desecrated the entirety of the Beit HaMikdash. Zchor Asher Asa Tsar Bifnim, Shalachar Bo Lifnai Velifnim, Nachloseinu Bies Ketimei Lechem Aponim Vegider Paroches Bales Shtei Panim. He violated, he made the Lechem Aponim, the bread on the Shulchan, impure, and he cut. It says that he took his sword and he cut the Paroches, the curtain that was between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. Titus took his sword, and this beautiful red curtain that had the images of the cherubim, the angels, on it, he sliced them, and he used his sword, which was red already from the blood of the many people that he killed on his way there. Bom govar bani bezolivu yoru tzelov bitzamor avosenu zor kichnis ubachorvei ochlo ish v'zetzor zorno ichnis v'lo michevo ish avodim chitu besochol avas ish v'amo beveis ish v'morom shalach ish. The fire consumed it. He violated it. He did acts of immorality inside the Beis Hamikdash, and then he took all the vessels to Rome in ships together with slaves to Rome. ונפשנו תבענו כארצי כלי שרס, ושמם בני שייט בני שרס, הורינו נמכחיש כי משרס, ולא מצאת אישים או שלושה כלי שרס. נשים כשרו כי בארץ, וקרקע בייס נולו בחריץ. In the Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to wear shoes inside, and he had special metal shoes that he used, and he scraped the floors of the Beis Hamikdash with it. Starim lubasu v'ofaris v'beis kodesh hakodoshim tzanach hanasu v'shritz b'churim v'bachutz tzolgo mechuzo ki mesoru ki yuzak v'shishim ribo mazikim zkenim v'asu ki yershu mishchakim asos rutzono v'asu mazikim shabasu din v'yobo anu v'yisam v'chomo v'yaver somon noflo erval nidnei pitzel achluz ve'armonam kinot ashdok ve'armon. Then he comes and speaks about how he stands. Titus stands in the entrance to the Beis Hamikdash. Al Pesach Har Habayis Echel Lavo. He starts coming to the entrance of Har Habayis of Temple Mount. Biad Arba'a Roshei Tafsar Lachrivo, together with his 4 cronies to destroy it. Al Tzad Ma'aravi Lezecher Hisrido. On the western side of the Beis Hamikdash of Har Habayis, even though he made sure he destroyed everything, he decided to let the world know how great the place that he destroyed was. And so he left one wall, and that's the western wall. And so he leaves the western wall as a testimony to his power. And that is what we have, the western wall. The Tzag Achar Koslenu V'lo Rav Rivo. He didn't do anything to the western wall. אתה כותבת בראשי סולפנו, סילבולים אשר אין בו, אשר אין בו הם קונו, משם נפנוס, לא מרוג של גויים ולא שעתו, אלא מנפלפנוס ושל חומר צוץ, ושלוש ספינוס. You sent the children of Jerusalem in ships to Rome. A lot of these children, young teenagers, children, were sent as slaves. In fact, one of the most tragic parts of the destruction of the second temple, that did not really exist as much in the first temple, is that the Jewish people were sold into slavery in more than 100,000, tens of thousands, more than 100,000 were sold into slavery. In fact, after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Colosseum in Rome was built. And sort of the date of the Colosseum in Rome, if you ever see the picture, the glory of this huge Colosseum built with slaves they took from Judea. And there's documentation from back then how the prices for slaves dropped after this destruction. And so we mourn not only the loss of the building of the Beit HaMikdash, but we also mourn the incredible human tragedy, the unthinkable tragedy of slavery, where all these people were taken into slavery across the Roman Empire, across the ancient world, many of them young children. שיבנו שיווק יבואו בנבחיים ושיתפו עצמם יחד לנפול בים שיר ושבחו שרו כיום כי עליך הרגנו ומצולוס ים כי סעומוס בו על נפשם כל זאת בסנו ולא שכחנו כפילו מהמשון תקבסם נסנו למשנים בשנו ועסקום נשמעו רעלם התישן. Many of these young children, teenagers, when they were on the ships on their way to be slaves, they threw themselves into the ocean because they could not bear the thought of being slaves in Rome. We're going to skip to a Kinot that we say not only on Tisha B'Av, but we also say it on Yom Kippur. And the reason we say this Kinot both on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur is because it is a Kinot about the 10 martyrs, martyrs that were killed by the Romans, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Ishmael, Kohen Gadol, and others, were not killed all in the same event. Although the Kinot sounds like it for poetic reasons, we're talking about a period of time of right before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, some during, after, and then later when you have the Bar Kokhba rebellion and the oppression of Jews and eradication of Jews from Israel, that is when you have the 10 martyrs. So you have that Kinot is Kinot Chaf Aleph, and it really describes many historical events in very explicit terms. Kinot 21, you can easily find it online. Arze Halvanon Adire HaTorah. The cedars of Lebanon, the great ones, Adire HaTorah, Bale Trasim B'Mishnah U'Begemara. They are the shield carriers of the Jewish people with the Mishnah, with the Gemara, with the Torah that they have and use to lead the Jewish people. Giborei Koach, powerful heroes, Amalel B'Tahara, who study the Torah with purity. Damam Nishpach V'Noshsa Gevura, their blood was spilled and we lost our strength. Hinam Kedoshe Haruge Malchus Asara, these are the 10 ones. I'm going to go line by line because it's really incredible historical events of lasting consequences. Hinam Kedoshe Haruge Malchus Asara, these are the 10 Haruge Malchus, the 10 martyrs. The Al Eile Ani Bochia Ve'eni Nigra, for these I cry and my eye is streaming with tears. Zos Bezachri Ezak B'Mara, when I remember this, I cry out bitterly. Chemdas Yisrael Keli HaKodesh Nezer V'Atara, the cherished treasure of Am Yisrael, Nezer V'Atara, the crown of Am Yisrael, Tehore Lev, Kedoshim Mesu B'Misach Amura, pure ones, holy ones, they died in a very severe punishment, very severe death. And in some cases, they drew a lot because they knew that they were both destined to die, and so they wanted to know who's going to go first. They couldn't decide. They couldn't make such a tough decision on their own. Yadu Goral mi Rishon Lacherev Berura. They put a lot. Kinfol Goral al Rabban Shimon Pasha Tzavoro Ubocha Kinigzera Gezera. When the Goral came, when the lot fell on Rabbi Shimon, Pasha Tzavoro, he put out his neck, Ubocha Kinigzera Gezera. He cried when he realized this is the end. Rabban Shimon. Then Rabban Shimon was killed by the hegemon, by the powerful Roman person. Mizera Aharon Shal bevakasha livkos al ben Agbira. He asked permission to cry over the son of royalty. Not al Rosho unesano al arkubosa. He took his head and he put it on his knees. Those who saw him being killed mourned him. They went into a fetal position of crying for menorah hatehora, for this pure, someone who was pure like the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. Some eina v'aleina v'upiv al piv ba'ava gemura onava omar pe'am izgaber batorah pisom niknesa olav misa meshuna v'chamura. He cried. He said, "Look, this mouth that was studying Torah is now going to die in a terrible fashion." The Roman commanded to skin his head, to take off the skin of his skull. When the Russia, the wicked executor who was there to kill him, came to the place in his head where he used to put on tefillin, would go on his head. He cried out, he called a call, the entire world was shaken and the land crumbled. And now we come to the story of the execution of Rabbi Akiva. Me'acharav hevius Rabbi Akiva, oker harim metochanom zu bezu besvara, v'sarkwes besaro b'masrek shel barzel ishtabara. They brought Rabbi Akiva, who was able to grind up mountains with his svara, with his ability to think, to discuss, to manage the logic of the Torah, and they took a comb of metal and they combed his flesh before he was killed, a horrific torture we don't wish on anyone. They took this comb of metal and they combed his flesh. Yatzasa nishmaso be'echad ubas kol amra. His soul came out at once, and a voice came out of heaven saying, Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva. Fortunate are you, Rabbi Akiva. Gufach tahar b'chol minei tahara. Your body is as pure as they come. Ben Bava Rabbi Yehuda Acharav Heviu b'shivron lev v'hazhara. Neherad ben Shivim Shana b'dei Arura. They brought Yehuda ben Bava, who was so pure, and he was 70 years old. He was killed by this wicked Roman. Yoshev Betani Sayamaki v'chosliv b'melachto lemara. He would often fast because he was such a pure person, and he was very, very dedicated and righteous with what he did. And what happened after the killing of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava? Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion Acharav, Makil Kehilos Betzion Shahara. Rabbi Chanina, the son of Tradion, who used to gather people around him in the gate of the city of Yerushalayim and teach Torah. Yoshe v'dorish v'sefer Torah imo v'hikifuhu b'chavle zemora. He was sitting when he was caught for the terrible crime of teaching Torah. It was forbidden to teach Torah in Rome, in the Roman Empire in Israel. And this we're already talking about not the time of the year 70 when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, but we're talking 40 years later, in the year 110, at the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, where it was completely forbidden to study Torah. The Romans catch him and they see that he is studying Torah, and they surround him with the Torah, and they surround him with wood, and they burn him at the stake. Not only did they burn him at the stake, they didn't want him to die an easy death, so they took wet cloth, wet wool, and put it on his heart, on his mouth, so that he stays alive and suffers for as long as possible. Sfugin shel tzemer hinichu al libo shelo yomus mehera. They put the sfugim of tzemer on his heart, shelo yomus mehera, so he doesn't die fast. Next, Chassid Rabbi Yeshev HaSofer Haragu Am Amora. The nation of Amora, the Romans, who did actions of Sodom and Amora in their cruelty, Zrakuhu vehishlichuhu laklovim velo hukbar bekavura. They threw him, they tossed him, and they threw him to the dogs, so that he was not able to get a proper burial. A voice came out of heaven saying, this person did not leave one thing that he didn't keep in the Torah. The Achar of Rabbi Chutzpis b'yom ever, Rabbi Chutzpis HaMetorgiman, who would translate the words of the Torah, was killed. Ofa poreach nisraf v'havel piv kavamedura. If a bird would fly over him, it would get burnt with the holiness. Tzadik Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua ba'achrona ne'arag b'madkira. Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua was killed with being stabbed. The Yomer of Shabbos haya zman kiddush vayikadesh vayikra. It was Friday night, and he was saying kiddush. He was sanctifying the Shabbos as it comes in. Vayikadesh vayikra. Cherev shalfu alav elohinichu b'chaim legamra. They took out a sword, and in the middle of him reciting kiddush, they didn't allow him to finish Kiddush, and they stabbed him. Yotzesa nishmaso b'vara Elohim yotzer v'tzartzura. As he was reading about the creation, about God's creation, his very soul was taken away from him. Kahena v'chahenu hosifu b'nei avlo le'anos b'ge'ara. So on and so on, the wicked Romans continued to destroy and kill. Biskila sreifa hereg v'chenek miyucha l'shara. With all different kinds of vicious executions, no one can really even evaluate. Noseros mimeno yochlu arayoseh bezura. The remainders of the Jewish people are being devoured by lions once we're in exile. This sheep. Chazeh atnufa v'shokat rumo tarfu aryeh v'hakfira. The holy parts of the korban that usually go for holiness are devoured by this lion. Yetiv Adonai velo Yosef od leyasra. Amitz birkaim koshlos chelek Yaakov u'Moshia beis Torah. Letzedek yimloch melech yom rusholmu yimei evlech leora misa v'nelech. May Hashem bring no more pain, no more tear, no more suffering to me, and may we actually see redemption. May we no longer suffer. The next keynote we're going to say is a very short keynote, very sad keynote. It is keynote written by Rabbi Ishmael about Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha, and it shares one of the saddest stories. And sort of by zooming into a specific story, it explains why there was. It sort of sometimes, in order to understand a tragedy, you need to see the small picture. Sometimes you see the entire picture, it's tragic, but sometimes when you look at the individual story, that is when you realize the pain, the anguish, and that's what we do here in Kina Chaf Gimel Ve'esnavi Chatasi Heshmima, when we speak about the story of the son of Rabbi Ishmael. And basically what happened was you had the Kohen Gadol, his name was Rabbi Ishmael Kohen Gadol, one of the most righteous Kohanim Gedolim. And this Rabbi Ishmael Kohen Gadol is standing up in Jerusalem, and his own children are taken into slavery, and they're taken to Rome, far, far away. You can just imagine the suffering they've been through. 2 children that grew up in Jerusalem as children of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, the royalty, the aristocracy of Jerusalem, and they are taken on a ship to Rome, and they're sold in the slave market to 2 separate people. They don't know about each other's fate. And one day, 2 Romans speak to each other, and they say, look, one of them says, I have the most beautiful son. I have the most beautiful slave. I got him from Judah, and I got him from Jerusalem. And the other says, I also have the most beautiful slave, and she's from Jerusalem. And they say, you know what? If they come together, we can have more slaves, and let's have them come together and then we'll split the children that they have. And so they put them together in the same room at night, and Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Kohen Gadol, thinks to himself, I am the son of the Kohen Gadol, of a high priest. There is no way I will even come close to anyone. There's no way. And she's sitting there, and she's thinking, I'm the daughter of the high priest. I'm not going to come close to anyone. And the night goes by, and they're sitting there, and they're crying, and they don't recognize that they're in the same room as their sibling, their brother and sister. And they wake up in the morning, and they see each other, and they recognize what they have come to, where they are. They've gone from being at the height, at the peak of Jerusalem, and now they are in the ashes, in the lowest parts of Rome. And it says that they cried and died on the spot. And that's just a powerful focus on the individual stories of going from the pinnacle of pride, the pinnacle of aristocracy, the pinnacle of Jerusalem, to the very bottom of Rome. Chaf Gimel, the Es Navi Chatasi Heshmima. Es Navi Chatasi Heshmima, Vedima, Osi Alechi Azrima, Uvion Zenihidiyah, Rima, Ve'ohima, Miyamim Yamima, Eivel Leiv Venichum Chobach Ladoil, Umikol Keim Tzirei Yudal Gadol, Avenu Vas Rabbi Ishmael Kohen Gadol, Zichra Mikol Bilbo, V'yosimo, Ve'ohimo Miyamim Yamima, Eis Nishmu V'nachu B'shnei Adonim, Ve'mshecheinim Zelu Mas Dechonim, ויספרו זה לו זה עניונים, זה אומר משביעס ציונים שביסי שבחו שונים, כלבנו בזיווק לסתר פונים, ובשר כקציו וימימו, ואוהימו מיומים יומימו. ראיהו סיפר לו בכפליים העננים משבי ירושלים שביסי עבד יפה עיניים, כשמש בסופו עץ צהריים, בואו נזעקים ולחלקו בינתיים, Vivlodos que voltou bem chamar no chamazos titanos, bem nos exercos esmada afrimo, Ve'ohimo miyomim yomimo kiskimo azos shneim yachad,
לא ערב זיבום בחדר אחד, ואדונים מבחוץ ליבום כאחד, והם בוכים במר נפש בפחד. עד בוקר בחייסם לא הנימו, ואוהימו מיומים יומימו. זה יספוד בחיל וקיר לוי מסה, מנהרונך לשפחה יהי נושא, והיא גם נטייה לו בסיגרס שוסה. בס יוכבדך לעבד תנוסה, אוי כי זוס גוזר אומר ויוסה. לזוס יבכו אשוך סיל וחימו ואוהימו מיומים יומימו. Or boker says that Kiru, the morning came, they recognized each other. ונזדבקו יחד ונזכברו עד יוצאסון נשמוסון בנשימו. ואוהימו מיומים יומימו. לזוס יקון נרמיו ושיו גזרו זוסתו מדני בוכיו. ובלבבי יקד יקודוך ביו ונובס מספד רב הרימו. אורים ושיחים ואוהימו. וכל נהי הרימו. The next Kinot, we're not going to say all of it, but it's very worthy of mentioning, is speaking about the Crusades. Many of the Kinots were written during the Crusades. Mi tein roshi mayim ve'eni mekor nozlaim. So on Tisha B'Av, we not only mourn the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, but also all the later tragedies. And so we mourn the Crusades, we mourn the losses, we mourn the Spanish Inquisition, and we mourn everything that has happened throughout the centuries as a result of our exile. We're going to say, 1 second. We're going to say 3 more kinos, Chaf Vav, Lamed Vav, and then we're going to say Elitzion. Chaf Vav speaks about, it's a Kinot speaking about Yirmiyahu going to the Kvarim of the Avos and asking them to pray for Bnei Yisrael. אז בהלוך ירמיהו על קברי אבוס ונאמר צומוס חביבוס מאתם שוכבוס בניכם גולו בותיכם חריבוס והיה זכוס אבוס בארץ תלבוס גו כולם בקינים על חסרון בונים דובבו בכל תחנונים בני יצא שוכן מאונים והיה ים תחס וזוכרתי להם בריס ראשונים הם מרוח בודו בטוב ולא פחד ולא ראו ועלים עיניים מהם ולא שבו ולא נוהו ויחספק על אמירס לוהו זועקוב המון בעבורם וכינן פני אלרום חינום נוסייסי עשר בחינוס עבורם אין חוזיסי שיברום והיה ים תחס al tira Avram turns to Hashem. He says, how can you do this to me? You said that you're going to take care of my children. And so Hashem responds to Avram. He says, what was I supposed to do? They admitted Avodah Zarah. They worshipped Avodah Zarah. Yitzchak says, what do you mean? I offered myself as a sacrifice. How could this happen to my own children? Hashem, don't you remember what I did? And so Hashem responds and says, Moshe Rabbeinu, our faithful shepherd. So how is this possible? The sound of Leah pouncing her heart. Rachel, her sister, is crying for her children. Zilpa and Bilhah are also mourning.
We assure them, go, you can rest in peace. Hashem tells them, don't worry. Go rest because I'm going to return them. Don't worry. And that's what it says with Rachel. Hashem says, Mimi kolech nibechi. Don't worry. I will return them. The next Kinot was written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the great Spanish Jewish poet who was an incredible Torah scholar, an incredible poet and a cultured person, and he yearned more than anything for the land of Israel. And he mourns the destruction of Israel with such graphic detail of exactly every place in Israel and where he wished he would be. And actually, eventually, he himself ended up going to Israel. Become a symbol of Jewish yearning for Israel. Tzion halotish ali lishlom asiraych. Tzion, are you not going to seek out the well-being of your captives? Tzion here is a woman, it's Zion, the land of Israel. Why don't you look out? Seek. Where are your children? They're lost. Why aren't you seeking them? Tzion halotish ali lishlom asiraych. Tzion halotish ali lishlom asiraych. Dorshei shlomech ven yeser adoraych. Mi'amu mizrach u'mitzapon v'seimon shalom rachav v'karov mikol hagoraych. U'shlom asir tikva nosin mav ketal chermon even yichsaf l'ridet amal haroraych. My eyes are dripping tears like the mountain of Hermon, tears from all the snow that melts, all the Banias River, the Dan River, all the water that comes from the Hermon is like the tears of my eyes. Ani Kinot l'shiraych. These famous words of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi inspire centuries later the words in Yerushalayim Shel Zahav l'chol shiraych ani Kinot. When she sings in Yerushalayim Shel Zahav halo l'chol shiraych ani Kinot, it comes from here. Ani Kinot l'chol shiraych. Libi leveisel v'lifnei el me'od yemel l'machanayim b'chol nigei tehoraych. Shama shchina shchun aloch v'yotzrech v'sachrim v'sharei shachak she'oraych u'chmod Adonai levad hayom me'oreich v'yein sahar v'shemesh v'chol chavim me'oraych evchar lenafshi l'ishtapech b'mkom asher ruach Elohim shpucha al b'chiraych ach beis melucha v'ad kisei chavodel v'ech yoshvu avodim alei kisos geviraych. Now he says some of the most famous words. Mitnei meshotet. I wish I can just wander. And by the way, this is a word, a term we should think about. Today we don't get to visit Eretz Yisrael very easily. Things are closed down. Air travel is not what it used to be. But just think about Rabbi Yehuda Halevi sitting in Spain, and his only request is, Mitnei meshotet. I wish I could just walk and wander. In the places where God revealed himself to your prophets, just to be able to walk in Israel, that itself is something I yearn for. Afki be'omdi alei kibros avosai v'shtomem alei Hebron nibchar kevoraich haru avorim nahor asher shom shnei orim gedolim meoraich u'moraich chayeinu shomos avir artzeich u'limor dorav kas artzeich u'nofes tzuk meoraich yinam lenafshi holoch orom leochef alei chorvos shemamar she'oyod eviraich. He says, I would rather walk without any shoes in a place where used to be your place of glory, the Beit HaMikdash. I'd rather be able to walk in those ruins without any shoes than anything. Even to be destroyed in Jerusalem is something that's for him just a dream. Ole Charvos Shanam Asher Ayo, Devirayich, Bimekom Aronech Asher Nignaz Bimekom, Kerubayich, Asher Shochnu Chadrei Chadorayich. Ogoz Ve'ashlich Bernei Zeveyekov Zman, Chilo Beretz Boveles Nezirayich, Ech Yerav Liochol Veshosus Beis Echezeh, Ki Yischavua Kelovim Es Kfirayich. How can I eat or drink when I see the persecution, the suffering of the Jewish people? How can I enjoy the sight of day when I see the flesh of your children eaten by the vultures? He says, Kero, lo eshtechem moraich, vezkoro holi vavemtze shemoraich, Zion klilas yoki ava v'chen orei, v'nod v'chen nikshu nafshos chavireich, Emas mechim v'shalvosech ma'ako avim ashom v'mosaich, u'bochim ashmoraich, nibor sheli shoafim negdeich, u'mishtachavim ish mimekomo aleino, ochach sheoraich, Edrei hamonech asher golu v'nispazru me'ar legiva v'lo shofechu v'nereich, המחזיקים בשולייך ומסמנים מעלות, ולאחוז בסמסוני סמורייך, שינרו פסרו סיירוך בגוד, לא מימך, לא מידמו בסומייך ואורייך. There are other countries that are bigger, but can they even compare to the holiness of Eretz Yisrael? אל מי ידמו משיחייך ואל מי נביאייך ואל מי לווייך בשירייך. Can they compare to your prophets, your prophecy, the Levim, the song in the Beit HaMikdash? Yeshan v'yachlov kalil kol mamlechu, so elilim chosnich l'olam l'olam nezirayich, Ivel Moshe v'Eloich Mashrei Moshe v'char v'yikra v'yishchon v'chatzerayich, Ashrei mechake v'yagia v'yireh lo soreich, v'yivoku olav shechorayich, Liros v'tovas v'chirayich, v'alos v'zim v'choseich b'shuveich, Lucky is he who waits for you and is going to see your rebuilding and redemption. We're now going to turn to the last Kinot of Elitzion. There's here, by the way, a lot of Tzion-themed Kinots that were written by Rabbi Eliezer HaKolyer. Sorry, before we say Elitzion, there's two historically important Kinots that we're going to say. One is Shali Srufa Ba'esh, and it has to do actually with something that happened not so long ago, 2-3 years ago. Shali Srufa Ba'esh, it speaks about Yerushalayim, which is burnt in fire, but it also speaks about the burning of the Talmud. And I think 2-3 years ago, the Notre Dame Church in Paris was burned. And that is the oldest church in Europe, one of the oldest that was still working. And the King of France made a law that all the books of the Talmud, any Jewish book except for Chumash, is going to be gathered and burned. And the place it was burned was right in front of the Notre Dame Church in Paris. And 24 wagons of books were brought there and burnt. And it's before the printing press, which meant that the entirety of Torah study was taken centuries back because people didn't have books. And so we say Shali Srufa Ba'esh, we cry for the one that's burnt in fire, Jerusalem, but we also say Shali Srufa Ba'esh, we mourn everything that was burnt, including the holy books that were burnt in Paris. Then the next thing we say, also very historically important, is, one second, there you go. This is one of the most recent Kinots ever written, and it is a Kinot for the Holocaust. It was written by Rabbi Shlomo Halberstam, the Baba Rebbe, the previous Baba Rebbe, And on Tisha B'Av, we mourn not only the destruction of Jerusalem, but everything that came as a result of the exile of being expelled. And there's no greater tragedy our people have experienced since, like the Holocaust, where we lost 6 million of our brothers and sisters. And as my grandfather would say, we know the numbers. We know how many people were killed in the Holocaust. We know how many people went into Auschwitz, how many people went into Theresienstadt, how many went to Buchenwald, Birkenau, Bergen-Belsen. We know those numbers. We don't know how many of those people would have been the greatest leaders. We don't know how many Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yoshever Soloveitchik. We don't know how many Golda Meirs, how many David Ben Gurions, how many poets, how many inventors, how many Albert Einsteins, how many. We have no idea how many of those people that walked through the gates of a concentration camp would have become Prophet Chaim. And she also lost her life in the not concentration camps, but in the Holocaust. They shot them all outside the town of Radin. And I just can't help imagining those cousins that I would have, the people that I would know, 8 children. And every single person that was killed in the Holocaust has an entirety of a story. So we know the numbers, but we have no idea about the suffering, the lost potential, and everything that they've been through. And so on Tisha B'Av, we not only mourn the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, we also mourn the greatest tragedy, the Holocaust, where we lost a third of our people. A third of our people. 100 years ago, there were 20 million Jews. Now there are about 14 million Jews. And we lost our people. And so we mourn that. We remember them. And the Kinot reads through that different potential. It reads through different kinds of people that were lost and the horrors of the cruelty of what they've been through. That also is something that is unfathomable. זיכרונו בקומנו כל ישראל כולכם ישמע ברמה כי השמידה גרמניה את עמנו בימי זעם המלחמה למיסוס נשומות אכזריות וברם ובצמא אל תשכחו בכל הדורות עדי תזכו לרוס בנחמה תעקסם ובחיוסיהם צפופים וסגורים בקרונים כתול מהטבח יובלו לשרפו בכבשונים כל שבוע מזוכר תמיד לפני שוכם ועונים בקורם שמע ישראל מסרו נפשם אדוני האדונים ראשי ישיבות ותלמידיהם והמוני עם חושמו העבידו בינויים קשים והרגום ביד רמו דמי ילודים רכים צועקים אליכם מן האדמה נקום נקמסתך ונושים לא שחיי כל נשמו על שריפת אלפי מדרשות ובתי כנסיות רבבות ספרי תורה ולומדיה נקונן בשיות שילחו באש מקדשי אל הציצו בינינו צופיות ישלם הרבים סדירו יודעים בגויים עולי גוויות זעקו שמיים ואדמו על אלפי היורוס מבצרי זרה ארצות אירופה קהילות הנוכל היו מקיימים מסורה צדיקים זקנים וחסידים דבקי אמונה טהורה מיום גולנו מארצנו לא היה כזה כי לא היה נורא רחם על שירוסנו הביטנו משמיים למחנות הקדושים ב10 גאות מצרים כל מבייס בקודשנו ונחמנו בכפליים רוממנו והביאנו לציון וירושלים. It's not the only Kinot. There's also other Kinos on the Holocaust. One most famously written by Rabbi Shimon Schwab, the rabbi of the Kal Adas Yeshurun, originally from Frankfurt and then in Washington Heights. And he also has a Kinot about everything that the Jews have been through and what Germany has done to our people. Very worth looking at. We now reach the last Kinot that marks the end of Kinot, Elitzion, and it's also written by Rabbi Yehuda Levi, and it speaks about Zion as a woman who just is going into labor and having a baby while losing the husband of her youth. And it's saying, mourn Zion like a woman who just lost her husband. כמו אישה בציריה, וכימסו לו חגור עסק על נעוריה, אלי ארמון אשר נוטש, והשמצון אדוריה, ועל מיאס מחורפיה, בסוף מקדש חדוריה. אלי ציון ואוריה, כמו אישה בציריה, וכימסו לו חגור עסק על בעל נעוריה, עלי דרוס משור סייל, מניני שיר זמוריה, ועל דמו אשר שופך, כמו מימי יוריה. עלי הגיון מחובר, אשר דומם באוריה, ועלו עד אשר שומעים, וביתו סנהדריו, עלי זבחי סמידיה, ופדיוני בכוריה, ועל חילוק כלי איכון, ומזבח כתוריה, עלי כפי מלוכיה, בני דוד גביריה, ועל יופיום אשר חושך, בשרו כשריה, עלי כבוד אשר גולו, ויש קורבן בביריה, ועל חץ אשר לוחץ, ושום שקים חגוריה, עלי מחץ ורוב מקוס, אשר הוכו נזיריה, ועל ניפות אלי סבל לא נעוריה, עלי שמחה סויביה, שחקו על שמוריה, ועל עינוי בני חורים נדיבו טהוריה, עלי פשע אשר ימסו, סלול דרך אשוריה, ועל ציבוס כעוליה, שזופהו שחוריה, עלי קולוס מחורפיה, וישרבו בגריה, ועל רגשס מגדפיה, בסוף משכן חצריה, עלי שמחו אשר חובל בפי קומי מציריה, ועל תחת יצב חולך כשבו שמע מוריה, אלי ציון ואוריה, כמו אישה בציריה, וכיבסו לו חגור עסק על בעל נעוריה. We're going to conclude with the psukim of Nechama. We say at the end of Keynote, we say some words of Nechama, and we ask Hashem to rebuild Jerusalem. Achomel al dal chamol al dalusam reishim mosam v'orech galusam al tiktof al me'od reishit lusam v'al al tizkor al vonom esik lusam. Refona es shibram menachem avol lusam ki afel sibram v'atari al lusam kadesh yameinu kimei kadmonai kenon chol bonei Yerushalayim Adonai. תרחם ציון כאשר אמרת וסתכוננה, כאשר דיברת תמר ישוב וסחיש גאולה וסשוב לירושלים, ברחמים רבים, ככוסו לא היה נביאך לכם, כה אמר אדוני שבתי לירושלים, ברחמים ביסי בונו בונו אדוני צבאות, לקבינות על ירושלים, ונאמר עוד קרוא, לאמור כה אמר אדוני צבאות, עוד תפוצה נאוריים בטוב, ונלחם אדוני ציון, עוד ציון ובחרות בירושלים, ונאמר, כי ניחם אדוני ציון, ניחם כל חרבוסהו, ויוסם מדבר כדן נרבוסו, כגן אדוני ששון ושמחים בציבות, תודו וכל זמרה. We're going to continue, for those who wish, at 6 o'clock with the reading of the Mincha. Mincha reading and Haftorah. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will continue at 6 o'clock with Mincha, Haftorah, and Torah reading. Have an easy rest of your fast. There are tremendous programs out there, the Chafetz Chaim Heritage Foundation, YU, OU, and many others. So have an easy and meaningful fast.